Greetings and welcome to Outlaw Gamer Radio, the official podcast of OutlawGamers.com. This is the show where we live to play and play to live. I'm Britt Adams, joined by a man who you can find standing by the roadside somewhere near you, begging someone to take his money and give him a special remastered edition of Batman Arkham City, Mr. Lauren Baumgarten. Lauren!
I don't know that the content, I don't know the scripting was the funniest scripting I've ever heard, but the delivery was up there with the best.
Sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes when you've got shit, you just have to really be enthusiastic about the shit you've got.
That was great. How you doing, man?
I'm great, man. Back from out of town, visiting a little family. Took Z on
a little family,
trip.
Like as in I'm not very tall family?
No, actually, they're all very tall, as it turns out. My wife's family. I just mean the duration of the trip. But took Z to the zoo for the first time.
Excellent, excellent.
The giraffes really blew her mind. Let me tell you, that's the biggest thing she's ever seen in her life.
I'm sure they look like they're essentially like 100-story buildings to her.
I have this amazing photo of her just sitting there with her eyes huge and her mouth agape, staring at a live giraffe for the first time. It's pretty funny. But anyway, it was a good time. How about you?
I took a trip this week as well, Brent. I spent a not insignificant amount of time in Velin. That is south of Novograd, I think. North of whatever the prologue area is. I don't know exactly. White Orchard.
Somewhere in the land of
I'm trying very hard not to say Tamriel. I keep wanting to say Tamriel.
It's tempting. Yes,
Tamaria. It is. I spent probably close to as much time there as you did on vacation.
Well, good for you, because since I was on vacation, I didn't get as much Witcher 3 time in, but I'll be anxious to talk with you about what I have played. But before we get there, let's run down just a little bit of info for everybody about what's going to be going on with the show for the next couple of weeks.
Yes, I am leaving. Not the show. That's not a great way to start that.
That's awesome.
I have to go back to Brazil to collect my wife and my dog and the remainder of our things. So I will be gone back in Sao Paulo for about 2 weeks. So for the next 2 weeks, you are going to do a show with unnamed surprise guest host or hosts.
Right.
Over the next couple weeks. And then I will return, Brent, to record our next show, which will be released on Tuesday, June 16th, the first day of E3. And I think we haven't hammered this out yet, Brent, but we're going to do some sort of E3 thing. We may do a show each night for maybe 30 minutes. So maybe Monday night, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll do a show kind of thing. Usually by Wednesday night, most of the news is out and over.
True.
Or we may just do a couple shows during the week, but we are going to do some E3 coverage this year, a little bit more, I think, than we did last year. So I will be back for that. But in the interim, in the next 2 weeks, you'll be doing the show with some good friends of the show.
Yes, indeed. That is the plan. And that is subject to change, given the possibility that some of these people might try to shoot me instead of answer their door when I come calling. That I do have that effect on people.
Indeed.
I've been told. But anyway, Lauren's roadside dreams have finally been answered. Maybe. We have mounting evidence that a Batman Arkham remaster edition is on its way. And there have been rumors about this, but there's a survey now, that somebody on NeoGAF got a hold of and posted that details some specific things and asks, how interested in this would you be? And this survey is just yet another piece of evidence in the mounting probability that some form of remastered edition of Batman Arkham Asylum and Arkham City are on their way. Now, the specific quote that's appearing in this article from PushSquare.com leads us to believe that it is more than just up-res textures. Here we go. Quote, It's rebuilding both games from the ground up with upgraded models, environments, lighting, shaders, and post-processing effects, end quote. Now, to me, this sounds like what they're saying is probably that we're going to see those first two games re-released in Unreal Engine 4. That's just my speculation, but it certainly seems that as opposed to just high-res textures, it looks like they're digging deeper, and that, I guess, just makes the most sense to me. Lauren, what do you think the likelihood of this is? How excited are you? What's your reaction?
You know, it's interesting, especially because you happen to choose to use that for the opening. But the reality is I have to say I'm not like overwhelmingly excited about this. So, and part of the reason is because I already own both of these games on PC, and now that I've hooked the PC into my television,
right? What need would you have?
Kind of a little bit. I mean, certainly if they redid it in Unreal Engine 4 and they changed a lot of the dynamic lighting, I would be open to it. But I have to say, one of my first thoughts was I already own this on PC. So what are they going to up? Are they going to up? In order for it to be meaningful to me, they would have to up-res, or I shouldn't say that. They would have to remaster the game to a degree that it was better than the current PC versions.
Right.
And, I was immediately I immediately had that reaction of, so am I going to buy this again for the PS5?
Yes, you will.
Whereas yes, owning it on PC, I own it. Yeah. And I don't have to do that. So I don't know, Brent. I don't know how, I think I'm more interested in a remastered Uncharted, which is only available on the PS4. Mm-hmm. I think I would be more interested in that. But this one didn't necessarily do it for me. At this point, I'm just clamoring for the new game in the series.
Right. I think that I don't know. I think I might bite on this. I don't know. I'm interested. I guess I want to see. Number one, I want to find out if it's actually happening or not. Number two, I want to see what they've done. I want to see how good it looks, and if it is moving the game to Unreal Engine 4, and it really looks profoundly better, then I don't know. I might be interested. I guess I'll just have to kind of wait and see how I react to the news and the inevitable announcement trailer that will accompany the news. Should this actually happen? I
mean, certainly, I would be shocked if we saw this before the release of the next Batman. Although that would make the timing would make sense had they done it that way. So this is I don't know. This feels a little weird to me, Brent. I can't find it right now, but there was a misspelling in this survey that made me dubious of its genuine
authenticity.
Yeah, of its genuine nature. But also the idea that this even exists right now. Like, why are they? I would think if they were looking to remake this game, they would have released it, like, say, now or a couple of weeks ago, leading up to the release of the next one in the series. It doesn't make sense to me that they're doing a survey for, ostensibly then that they wouldn't release this for another 9 months. And I don't.
What sense would that make?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. So I'm not 100% sure how valid this is. I'll be curious to see if it is valid or not, and if it is, whether or not it adds any value beyond what the PC version currently offers.
True enough. Well, moving on, there's a story here. This is concerning something that we haven't really talked about on the show before, but I think a lot of you are probably aware of. The BBC is making a drama that is about the kind of difficulty of Rockstar Games, the Grand Theft Auto series, and the myriad political and social controversies that sparked. And Daniel Radcliffe, famously of the Harry Potter series, is going to be playing Sam Hauser, and Bill Paxton is going to be playing the infamous Jack Thompson. And it's just this interesting little docudrama kind of thing that's being filmed. Take-Two Interactive, the parent company of Rockstar, has filed a lawsuit against the BBC for trademark infringement in connection with this show, which is tentatively titled Game Changer. Here's Rockstar's statement in full. Quote, Take-Two Interactive has filed suit against the BBC for trademark infringement based on their movie currently titled Game Changer as it relates to Rockstar Games' Grand Theft Auto video game series. While holders of the trademarks referenced in the film, title, and its promotion, Rockstar Games has no involvement with this project or goals to ensure that our trademarks are not misused in the BBC's pursuit of an unofficial depiction of purported events related to Rockstar Games. And then it just goes on, blah, 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 about, protecting their intellectual property, yada, yada, yada. But Rockstar Games, I was going to say Take-Two's position is that the BBC is playing in their sandbox and that they're not going to have it. I'm kind of curious because there's obviously a difference between copyright law from the United States to Great Britain or the United Kingdom, and as I was reading this, I was a little bit confused about it because I'm not sure that if this were a U.S.-based production, I'm not sure they really have much of a leg to stand on, seeing as how all of these people are public figures and the events were widely reported on in the media, in the public domain. The fact that somebody's going to come along and make a film about it, which is sort of based on these public events, I was confused as to how much traction Take-Two might actually have in stopping this from getting released or something like that, or if it's just sort of a perfunctory step they have to go through in order to be able to prove that they're maintaining defense of their IP and copywritten material, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get the sense necessarily. So there are a couple things here that were interesting to me, and I think it's just an interesting story. Number one is that somebody out there felt that this was worthy enough of a story to make a movie out of, albeit a TV movie or what have you, and that it was compelling enough that Daniel Radcliffe and Bill Paxton agreed to star in it, which is awesome. I thought that was kind of interesting.
No, that's cool. I actually really want to see it. It sounds fascinating.
But I don't get the impression that they're trying to stop the production necessarily, but it really felt like they're trying to make sure they're protecting their IPs so that, not that they're necessarily trying to protect the Hauser brothers, but or even ensure that they're portraying the events properly, because it's a that may be public domain, but that insofar as how they're using their IPs, like Grand Theft Auto, in the depiction, that they're following appropriate protocol. And it says, I was very surprised also to read very candidly that they said, we've tried repeatedly to come to an amicable solution, and they're just not working with us. And so
they being the BBC in this
case. Being the BBC. And so unfortunately we're going to have to litigate. And so I'm curious to know more details about specifically what the points of contention are. Exactly. Yeah. Right. But my sense is, just from reading that article anyway, is that their points of contention have to do with protecting the IP and ensuring that it's not inaccurately or cast in a negative light.
Yeah, I'm curious if they feel either just suspect or perhaps they know because, maybe they were given a copy of the script and at one point, and when it was believed that perhaps they would be on board or something like that. But I'm just wondering if they fear how they're going to be depicted, they being Rockstar Games or, Sam Hauser or Sam and his brother, whatever the case may be. I'm wondering if there's some fear over their depiction, and perhaps they're worried that the docudrama is going to maybe portray them in a less than positive light or something like that. I don't know. I'm very interested to kind of find out a little bit more about what their specific objections are, as opposed to the almost boilerplate sort of statement that they've released thus far.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get to hopefully hear more as the case moves forward, and they're more free to talk about details of the case. But I too look forward to it. All right, Brett. Next up, we're moving to a nice. Next up, we're moving to a charming little tale of a game whose title I absolutely love, and I can't believe that nobody has come up with this before. And that is the Yooka-Laylee Kickstarter.
It's all the buzz. It's just all the rage, that Yooka-Laylee Kickstarter these days.
It is that and
as
Bloodstain.
Evidenced by the fact that they have well, let's see what it is right here. From the humble goal of $270,041, they have currently raised $2.6 million in just over a week. They've got 22 days to go at this point.
Yeah, 22 days to go. 10 times the amount they were looking for. So they've actually come out, Brent, and stated that it's no longer going to be a video game, but they're actually going to send live action actors to your house to act out what you tell them to do.
That can afford it now.
That's exactly right.
It might also be worth mentioning that Bloodstained,
yes,
which we talked about a couple weeks ago on the show, that Kickstarter is also going pretty good. They were asking for $500,000. They've currently raised $2.68 million.
Also with like 20 days left, right? Or 18 days or something?
I think 18 days.
Yeah, so both of those. So Yooka-Laylee became the fastest game Kickstarter to... Is it game Kickstarter or fastest Kickstarter? To $1 million. Mm-hmm. They reached their funding goal in like an hour. The other thing that's interesting about both of these is that they're both... So Yooka-Laylee is something of a reimagining of Banjo and Kazooie.
Yeah.
And Bloodstained is something of a reimagining of the Castlevania series. And both are being made by former designers from both of those... from the dev teams that created both of those two games. And so... yeah, Brent, a bit, like it's been all over the place, Yooka-Laylee and Bloodstained, and how much money they have raised, and how there's an appetite now for games that harken back to the days of yore. And as a matter of fact, Polygon was kind enough to write an article about how this was. I don't know if you saw this on our website. I saw
this. I know what you're going to talk about.
I haven't actually read the articles, but essentially,
it's delightful. You should really read it.
They put out an article that talked about how Yooka-Laylee, Kickstarters like Yooka-Laylee, are killing the Kickstarter industry for game design developers, and then subsequently put out an article saying how Kickstarters like Yooka-Laylee are saving the game development.
I think that goes to show you just how broad the spectrum of opinion on this can be. But yeah, I read the one about how Yooka-Laylee and Bloodstained they're going to ruin Kickstarter for all games, because, and the premise of the article is that these kinds of Kickstarters give gamers unrealistic expectations of how much video games cost to develop, and so when somebody comes along and does an honest Kickstarter, which the author of the article had done, he had been involved in a Kickstarter in which I believe was unsuccessful, but I'm just struggling to remember all the details. But anyway, the author of the article had been involved in a Kickstarter, was talking about the fact that they couldn't really ask for the amount of money that they needed to develop the game, because all of these projects that have outside funding were undercutting them, essentially. It's like, oh, well, fucking Bloodstained is only asking for $500,000, but they were pretty upfront about the fact that they had additional funding waiting in the wings, and that the Kickstarter was really about demonstrating that there was interest in the game. That was not a secret to anybody. Now, perhaps there are other Kickstarters that have not been as forthcoming with that. But anyway, he was just concerned about that specific thing, which in my mind, I guess I kind of, and this may already be something that Kickstarter has in their guidelines, but the thing that I was thinking is, okay, well, that's no problem. Kickstarter just needs to say, hey, if you've got additional funding in place, you need to disclose it, and you need to talk about either sort of like where your Kickstarter funding is going to come in, like what percentage of your overall budget that is, or just how it's going to specifically be used to further your project. But just transparency.
Although usually I thought you were going to say that
transparency will solve this problem for everybody.
I thought you were going to say that that Kickstarter should just put it in their policies that, if you're asking for less money than other game developers, you should just ask for more money. But
well, no, that's what the guy who was writing the article wants. He wants everybody to. It's like that game fucking is going to cost $12 million, and you only asked for $500,000, you assholes.
I feel like, and I can't speak to Yooka-Laylee in particular because it's been a while since I watched the video, but I find that people who are asking for less money, the couple $100,000, the $30,000, whatever, are usually pretty upfront about saying this $30,000 is intended to get us. Oh, we've developed 90% of the game.
Yeah,
now we're
completion funds or something like
whatever
that.
It is. Yeah, I mean, I find that they're usually pretty upfront about that. But anyway, Yooka-Laylee and
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just one other thing, real quickly, is that I feel that like the premise of that argument against it always kind of comes back to Kickstarter is going to mess things up because people are stupid. In this case, people are stupid. They don't know how much video games really cost because of these unrealistic expectations. I don't think that's true of gamers. I think gamers are one of the most educated and knowledgeable group of consumers in any medium. I think that gamers really know their business quite well, and I think that I don't think that claim holds much water in light of the audience it's being discussed.
I agree. I think, Brent, what you get is, I think you largely get funding based on what people are interested in supporting.
Yeah.
And that's, people are interested in supporting these projects. And there's, as I said, there's been talk about how there's an appetite out there for sort of some harkening back to the days of yore. And Brent, I'm going to use this as a segue.
Nice
this
segue.
Is a good one. Is the last article up in the garage this week. And that is a huge announcement, in my opinion, from a company that you may have heard of called Retro. They run a little magazine.
Little magazine, the guy that edits the magazine you might have heard of. His name is Daniel the Hair Kaiser. No big deal. Just coolest guy ever. That kind of thing. That's
right. Well, apparently, Brent, this last week, I believe, Retro announced the Retro VGS, the Retro video game system, a cartridge-based console.
Yeah, buddy.
That they are going to be releasing. And we don't know a ton of details yet, except that it will play 2D games, original 2D games, and some of the old sort of N64 style games. I'm not saying specifically we don't know what games they're going to be made for it. We don't know price points. We know it's going to have its own controller.
You said N64, but I think you mean Super NES. Like I think they were talking about like 16-bit era games.
You're right. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Yes. Super NES. And all I can say is this looks super, super interesting. I knew nothing about it. I was very excited to see one of our listeners posted about it in the activity feed. Checked it out. It was a very pleasant surprise to see what the boys over there at Retro are doing. I highly encourage you to click on the link and go check it out. I think there is going to be an audience for this device.
I'm very interested to find out if that's the case. I think that what's really interesting about this console is the philosophy behind it. And I suppose that it's no surprise that it's coming from Mike Kennedy, who is the publisher of Retro Magazine, and this is kind of his brainchild. And really, this console is an answer to a direct answer to a lot of the things that we have talked about on this podcast, that we talked about back when we were Epic Battle Axe on both of the shows there, and the shenanigans, the endless shenanigans that seems to have shackled gaming in recent years. And I remember I think it was one of the final episodes of Battle Cry where we were doing viewer questions, and somebody asked a question that I ended up answering about when did all this bad stuff happen in games, and I said when game consoles became internet connected. That's when all this stuff started. DLC, broken games with giant day one patches and all that kind of thing. And the Retro video game system is really an answer to all that, in the sense that they're saying it's going to be cartridges, one and done. You put the game on the physical media and the game goes in the console, and that's it. There's no updates. There's no go back and fix it. And I think that, and there's no DLC or anything else to buy after. You buy the cartridge, you own the game, it works in perpetuity, you collect it, you put it on the shelf. It's just, I think it's just somebody kind of getting fed up with the business that video games have become, and are trying to kind of pull it back in that direction. I'm very, very curious to see. They're planning some sort of Kickstarter, and I'm very, very curious to see how it's received. I know that there's a lot of people that are upset about those kinds of business practices. The question in my mind is whether the style of games this thing's going to support, the kind of 2D retro style, whether those games and whatever price point this console and the games are going to have, whether that is a compelling enough combination for people to jump in with both feet.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Brent. I think it's going to be the combination. I do think that price is going to play a big part in this, and the types of games. But I think done right, I think that there could be an audience for this. I mean, just the idea of being able to stick my cartridge into something again.
Ever since your wife's been in Brazil, Lauren's been making those kinds of jokes. And we are back in the clubhouse. Pull up a chair, grab a beverage of your choosing, and we're going to have a little discussion on The Witcher 3. But before we get to The Witcher 3, how about some more Witcher 3 in the poll results from last week's main topic on The Witcher 3?
Before we get into this week's poll and then the topic,
Yes.
can we stop for a minute just to talk about Witcher 3?
Oh, why don't we do that? Because what else are we going to talk about?
Oh, my God, nothing. Okay, so last week's poll, right. Let's do last week's poll. The poll, Brent, we were talking about whether or not CG Projekt Red is getting a pass on this sort of issue of downgrading the graphics in The Witcher 3.
Downgrade,
and I can tell you after...
As
Downgrade
we've
gate,
now
yes.
come to know it.
Having played a significant amount of the game, I'm going to go with no. But I do want to apologize, Brent, because I was what I think is maybe one of my most egregious errors. Since we've done the show, is that last week I kind of made a big deal about the fact that not so much that things changed with the relative to the graphics, but that they went ahead and used it as a marketing tool, specifically in that trailer that I alluded to, in which they put all the E3 awards on the front of that trailer, and I thought that was disingenuous. And I have to say, I made a mistake, Brent.
Okay.
Because I was under the impression that trailer was released in the last 4 or 5 months. Turns out it was actually released just about a month after, or 2 months after, E3 of 2013 when they got those awards.
Right.
So they have not since used that as a marketing tool. And that was a bit of an oversight on my part, pointed out, of course, by one of our dedicated listeners. So I do apologize for that.
Right.
But
well, and
with that in mind,
that's important to I think to correct the record on, because certainly that colored our discussion on the matter.
Well, it certainly was at the crux of the issue for me personally. Yeah. But we put up a poll, Brent, and you asked, do you think CD Projekt Red did anything wrong with marketing the way they marketed The Witcher 3? And it shook out like this. Coming in third place, sure, they sold one game to reviewers and another to game players. With 40% of the vote coming in a not-too-distant second place was, it's no different than a Target render trailer. And coming in first place with 45% of the vote, Brent, was, it's a bit shady, but it's not a deal-breaker.
There you have it.
And I will say that, once again, you guys are all wrong.
That's usually not how it works.
No, I'm going to talk about the amazing experience that has been playing The Witcher 3 in the next section, Brent. Yeah. But I will say that I don't feel like I look at this game by any stretch of the imagination and think downgrade.
I think that I think that maybe even if it were another developer and the situation were exactly the same, I think maybe people would be a little bit more cynical about it. But I think that CD Projekt has gained enough goodwill with people, as I think I might have mentioned last week. I think that the fact that it's this particular developer and they have a pretty good relationship with gamers in general and their fans specifically, I think that that people are willing to hear them out and give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about hearing them out when we go into the sunset later on, but we'll get to that. For right now, let's talk about The Witcher 3 again.
Yes. Oh, God, yes, Brent. 1,000 times, yes.
There's an interesting...
Well, this isn't really about Witcher 3. It's about... Witcher 3 is the vehicle.
Yes, somewhat connected. But what we're going to talk about is the reaction of one developer to
one reviewer.
A Polygon review of The Witcher 3. And the article that we're linking to is called The Boy Who Cried White Wolf on Polygon's The Witcher 3
You see what
review.
He did there? You see what he did there?
I do see that. And this is from a developer, actually. This was a piece written by a developer named Adrian Kamirlash. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right, because I went through a lot of trouble to try and pronounce this guy's name right, but he's...
Brent, I think it's Schmeilars.
I'm almost positive you're wrong. Almost positive. But anyway, Mr. Kamirlash is a Polish game director, worked on The Vanishing of Ethan Carter. He was at People Can Fly before that. So you may be familiar with some of his games. But to get to the actual point that he's making, I think is pretty interesting. And Here's what he says in the first line. I consider Polygon's review of The Witcher 3 poisonous to the industry, to gamers, to game developers, and to game journalists. Pretty provocative opening, and he goes on to talk about why. He says that there's nothing really wrong with the review in terms of the wordsmithing and so forth, that he thinks that it's fine and does the job of helping gamers make an informed choice. But he also says that that the review does some pretty well, toxic, to use his word again, some pretty toxic things, and he's kind of disappointed that a review site like Polygon would allow this to happen. Lauren, why don't you talk a little bit about the two major points of contention that he has with what Arthur Geis says in his review of The Witcher 3?
Yeah, essentially he says that Arthur Geis calls CD Projekt Red misogynistic racists.
In so many words.
To distill it down for you, Brent. So the issue he has here is essentially that he feels that Arthur Geis is injecting his own personal social agenda into his reviews, and that this is poisonous, as he said, to every aspect of our industry, and that a truly skilled critic, he doesn't attack Arthur's writing, as you said, Brent, but a skilled critic can set aside his own personal biases and agenda and evaluate a piece of property while trying to look at it from different perspectives and at least understanding the nature of the property. So basically, he calls out two specific pieces of Arthur Geis's review. Right. And if I may, Brent, I'll just read them to you very briefly. One of them literally is about essentially that Arthur Geis is talking about how the game depicts women and how it's misogynistic and there's not enough female representation. And the other one is about how there are not enough people of color in the game. And the passages specifically that Mr. Shemailars calls out. I'm kidding. Adrian, I'm sorry. The passages that he calls out are as follows. So this is from Arthur Geis's review. Also, and I want to read this to you, Brent, because it's very clear that Arthur Geis is, while he's not outright saying it, he is making very clear judgment here, right? So, and I'll kind of expand on that in a little bit, but the passages read as follows. Also, while I do not by any means see every city, burg, and outpost in The Witcher 3, Witcher 3's world in my 70-plus hours spent with it, I don't recall a single non-white humanoid anywhere. Not in Skellig, not in Novigrad, Oxford, or anywhere else. And he goes on to just sort of talk about that a little bit more. The piece where he talks about, in his review, about female representation, he writes, when they're not being murdered, women in The Witcher 3 are comically sexualized. Nudity is everywhere. Think Game of Thrones on HBO. And even when they're dressed, female leads don't have it much better. And he goes on to talk a little bit more to give a specific example. Now, I am inclined, Brent, to agree with, now I don't even know how to say his name properly.
Kamirlash.
Mr. Kamirlash, in the way in which he is challenging Mr. Geis here. I mean, you alluded to the fact that there's history between the two, and sort of that, so that's understood. But it doesn't. Nonetheless, that history does not undercut the validity of his arguments. And essentially, you know what I thought of as we were sort of preparing to talk about this subject, Brent, was I thought of Casino, or The Godfather, two just in my mind fantastically made films. Both of which are extremely distasteful in their treatment to women.
Certainly.
At both of which have a noticeable lack of people of color in the films. But it's not a critique you hear leveled at those films. And I could name you another 100 examples.
Sure.
You don't hear those critiques leveled at those films because those films are depicting a world in which there are not a lot of people of color, and in which there are
there's not a lot of respect for women either.
Correct, and the value system around women is
skewed.
It is very skewed, in my personal political opinion.
Yeah,
but it's a representation of those worlds, and so it does seem odd to inject those arguments as a critique of the game.
Right.
Now, if he had written it, Brent, in the context of, I found this to be a difficult world to spend time in because it was noticeably lacking of people of color,
right,
and did not treat women.
It wasn't attuned to my sensibilities,
right,
and I found it constantly bothering me.
Right, and it did not treat women appropriately, and I find that to be a difficult world to be in.
Right, as opposed to, I find the developer immoral for making the game this way, which, in fairness, he does not come out and say that exactly, but he infers it very strongly.
Right. I think the absence of... So I think a more well-crafted review would have called it out in the way that we were just discussing, Brent, and followed it up with, so if you're a person who shares with my sensibilities,
right,
this may not be the game for you. I think the absence of some of that kind of verbiage makes the inference in what he's written significantly stronger, and it does feel like he's pushing a particular political agenda here, and I do think it's inappropriate.
I agree with you, and I think that you're kind of right to point out that there's a difference between the artist and the art. And, just because Francis Ford Coppola depicted a world in The Godfather in which the Italian mafia of that period in the 20th century were very racist and openly so with each other, and did not have a lot of respect for women, I don't see anybody accusing Francis Ford Coppola of having those values himself. They see that the artist is creating art depicting a particular social circumstance in a particular time, and nobody's crying foul on that. It'd be the same thing as if people complaining about there's not enough white people in a movie like Boys in the Hood. It's like, well, there weren't a lot of white people living in that neighborhood, so how would that really have anything to do with the culture and time that was being depicted? Yeah, that is being depicted in that movie. Or it's like, oh, there's not enough white people in Sleeping Dogs. It's like, well, why would there be?
This is interesting, Brent. If you go back and I was sort of kind of re-looking over those posts. Yeah. And he does not anywhere in here say, he says things like, there's another line that Schmeilers.
Kamirlash.
Thank you. Pulls out where he says, that said, this is pulled out of Arthur Geis's article. That said, the world CD Projekt Red has created is oppressively misogynistic. He's talking about the world that was created.
Yeah, well, and he's not, and that's the thing. He's saying, I think the language of that sentence is pretty important, as Mr. Kamirlash himself says. But if you really want to parse that out, He's not saying the world of The Witcher 3, blah, blah, blah. He is assigning ownership of the misogyny to CD Projekt.
No, he's assigning ownership of the world, not...
of the misogynist world to CD Projekt.
Well, but he's not wrong in that regard.
No, they are the authors of it, but he doesn't seem to be affording them, this there's a difference between the artist and the art that we are talking about right now. He doesn't seem to be making that distinction. But I don't know. Maybe we're pressing this button, too much. Maybe he doesn't really mean for that to be the case. Maybe we're blowing it out of proportion. But
I have not seen a response by Arthur Geis to this article.
He's skirting awfully close to a line of saying that the people who created this game are misogynist for doing it the way that they have, for depicting races and women as they have done. And as far as the race thing goes, I kind of agree with Kamirlash. I think it's a non-issue because this game is about European Slavic folklore, which is not replete with diversity. It's about a specific area of the world in a specific time when there was not a lot of diversity. It was a bunch of white people in that part of the world, and the game is about that. And so I don't really think that that's got a lot of validity to it. I don't know. Like, what's the expectation? Is the expectation that all video games must now first and foremost be social or political commentary that agrees with Geis's viewpoint in order for it to get a good review or something? And I'm just not exactly sure what the logical conclusion of that line of thinking is.
What's interesting, Brent? I have to tell you. So I went back and read the passage, and I thought to myself, when you really read the passage that I read to you closely in Kamirlash's article, when you read the passage that Kamirlash pulled out from Arthur Geis, the words are crafted quite well in that they're open for interpretation, and you're right, they don't outright accuse. However, so I thought, maybe I should go back and reread Arthur Geis's review to see the context of how it's in there. Yeah. And I'm looking for it, and this doesn't include the part that, so if you look at the paragraph I read when it says when they're not being murdered, women in The Witcher 3 are comically sexualized. Right. If you look above that, and up all the way, it includes the phrase that I read where he says, that said, the world of CD Projekt Red is created and plus misogynistic in some ways. There are fully 6 paragraphs dedicated to just this topic.
Right.
to just the part about women, not the part about race, but just the part about women. There are fully 6 paragraphs that are dedicated to that.
I think it's not just a throwaway line in the review. Then it's a pretty major focus.
No, it's almost. I mean, if you take out the little wrap up, it's essentially the final third of the review is about the attitudes towards women.
Right.
And that's interesting. I encourage people when you come into the show comments to comment about this to read both pieces here. And I don't know which one I would start with. I mean, maybe I would start with Mr. Kamirlash's, am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's very close.
Sorry. Article. But there is a what I would consider to be a disproportionate amount of time spent on that in this review.
Yeah. I think disproportionate in terms of of where you and I are sitting, but I think for Mr. Geis and I don't know, I mean, maybe Polygon as an organization or maybe their readership in general, maybe they really want to have that social justice warrior mindset first at the forefront of the review. And I mean, certainly that's fine. I mean, if that is really important to gamers in making a purchasing decision, there ought to be a review outlet that is addressing those concerns. But there ought to be other review outlets that are looking at the game from different perspectives as well. Regarding the thing about sexism in the game, Kamirlash makes an interesting point that I think is worth repeating. He actually doesn't really dog Geis all that much over the portrayal of women. He kind of sums it up to say, that if Geis wants to be sort of a neo-Puritan about that, and he specifically says a neo-Puritan American, and wants to kind of talk about this with like-minded people who might be offended by women being portrayed as sexy, then that's fine. That's down to taste. He doesn't give him too much pushback on that. But I think that the thing that's interesting about that, given the fact that Kamirlash brings Anita Sarkeesian into the argument a little bit, talks about how he feels some of Geis's viewpoints are being informed by her tropes versus women commentary. I think it's kind of interesting to see how this is sort of played out, given the fact that seemingly, feminism as a social cause is the foundation for a lot of these kinds of criticism, but there's enormous disagreement within feminism over sort of old school sex negative feminism and more modern sex positive feminism. And the idea that you can't be a feminist and disagree on that point, but like it can only go one way, and you have to agree that that depicting women as sexy is bad or exploitative or whatever. I find that really interesting. That's something that just I personally think kind of end up thinking about a lot as I see how women are represented in media, and it's something that I pay attention to a lot these days as the father of a daughter. And it's just one of those things that I think a lot about, and kind of find myself really trying to figure out where my footing on the issue is, so that I can represent it to my daughter as she gets older in a way that I'm comfortable with and that I think is positive for her. It's one of those things that I'm very interested in, particularly right now.
Right, but do you want that to be a major point in your video game reviews? Do you want that to be? So I'm reading his wrap up now.
Yeah.
Right. His wrap up is 2 paragraphs long, and it begins with this sentence at the beginning: The Witcher 3 subject matter, it's almost defiant doubling down on its treatment of women as titillating props for Geralt and the player, even as it tries to flesh out more female leads, is its most disappointing aspect.
I can tell you right now that there's plenty of women that I know who are delightfully titillated by Geralt as a sexual prop.
Well,
I've talked with a couple of my friends who are really happy about that bathtub scene. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Yes. Did you see that? Did you see the Conan O'Brien review, the
Clueless Gamer bit?
The Clueless Gamer. It was hysterical.
Oh man.
You could watch the first part of it, and it shows that bath scene, and it's absolutely hysterical.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, even though that is something that concerns you, Brent, and certainly it's a reasonable thing, and a conversation about feminism and about, its role in video games and all that is an interesting one. But does it deserve, again, I'm trying to give Arthur Geis the benefit of the doubt, but I read that wrap up and I think that is the single most disappointing aspect of the game for him. So if he watches The Godfather and he's disappointed that they beat women in The Godfather, does the movie get a 7 because of it?
Right.
And if so, are these just like supposed to be sort of opinions? Certainly reviews are opinions, but are they opinions based on sort of political beliefs? When you're at, again, I think when you, and I hate to use this as an example, Brent, but I honestly don't know what else to use. But if you're specifically writing for, say, a website that identifies as a Christian gaming website, right? That to me intimates to you that there is specifically a value system associated.
They're going to have a more conservative American traditional kind of.
Well, they're identifying as associating a value system with, in this case, Christianity. It would be the same thing if it was Jewish or whatever. A certain value system along with that's marrying the subject matter. But when you have a mainstream website like a Polygon or Kotaku and IGN that do not self-identify that way, certainly do not publicly make statements. Now, they may be that way. Like CNN may be pretty damn liberal. But Polygon certainly doesn't self-identify as with a certain belief system, right?
Like if you tune to Fox News, you know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get people that don't like President Obama, don't like Democrats, and they're going to say that. You know what to expect. But if you go to an outlet that's basically not claiming any political sort of bias, and you get political bias, then there's sort of an unfair quality to that.
Is that what's happening here, or is this just one man's opinion? And I don't know. There's something about it that that still, after I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it does seem like it seems like it played hugely on the way that he reviewed this game, and I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that. I mean, I can't say I'm 100%. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence. I won't lie to you.
I guess that I'm not all that surprised by it. I mean, given the fact that Polygon,
you sort of expect this from Polygon.
Given how Polygon, I was not surprised at all that Polygon and Kotaku went the way they did on Gamergate. There was no shock there to me at all.
Although I don't read Polygon a ton anymore. I don't think of Polygon. I don't think of them as like a. I didn't read enough on Gamergate at the time. I don't think of Polygon as like, I should expect this from Polygon. I should expect a review. I expect the same review from Polygon, and I don't mean the same review, but the same quality of review. And please, this might be insulting to Polygon, but I expect the same quality of review from Polygon or similar attack as I would from, say, an IGN or a GameSpot or a, I don't expect to see. I don't know. Well, I don't know. But here's another way to put this. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
What if we're reviewing hatred? Is that any different?
Yeah.
Hatred is completely offensive because of the nature of the subject matter.
Yeah. But and that's the thing about it, is that I'm fine with people being offended, and I'm fine with people sharing that viewpoint, and it may be a value to some people. I mean, like I said, I'm sure there's people out there in the world that share Mr. Geis's sensibilities and looked at The Witcher 3 and thought, you know what, I'm not buying this game if I find out that, there's a metal bikini anywhere in sight. And, they read his review and like, that's it, I knew it, fuck this game, I'm going to go play something else. In the marketplace of ideas, I think that everyone should be represented and their mindset represented. So, all of that's fine, but there is, I suppose that the thing to kind of come back full circle to the point that Camille Lash is making, what makes this toxic for the industry, as he claims, is the idea that if you start crying wolf, if you take the nuclear option at the first whiff of a metal bikini, then aren't you detracting from actual problems surrounding misogyny, sexism, women in society, and so forth? If you do the same thing because a game that takes place in a predominantly white region of the world, or at least at that time, and complain about the fact that they're depicting it
as predominantly white,
given the fact that historically that would have been accurate. If you are going to start crying racism as soon as that happens, isn't it like you're crying wolf? Aren't you in fact going to just overuse those charges to the point where people start ignoring them? And then every charge, including legitimate charges of racism and misogyny and sexism,
will not be heard.
Do not register on, with people anymore, because they're just like, oh, it's just another, it's just another one of those social justice warriors getting their panties in the water, or something like that.
Yeah,
and that, I think, that's an interesting point. And certainly it's not something that we need to have happen. We certainly do not want people to ignore actual instances of those things, because we need to be working to end them.
Right. Before we wrap up the conversation, Brent, I will say I'm not sure historical accuracy is a legitimate argument.
Given the presence of griffins and so forth.
That's exactly right. I mean, and it is kind of one of the arguments that's being leveled here, is that, like, well, at that time in that part of Europe, it was pretty much white. And I could see someone responding with, like, yes, but there were also no griffins, motherfucker. So why can't you put a black guy in there? Why can't we have someone from the Middle East? No, but it's interesting, Brent, and I keep going back and forth, and I don't know that I'm going to formulate a real opinion now. I felt strongly about it coming into the discussion, but the more we've sort of hashed it out, I'm not sure. So I think that, to me, usually is the sign that it's time to turn this over to the listeners, the people who pay the bills, and let them sound off on the topic. I think it's a really interesting one, and I'm very, very curious to know if people feel like this is inappropriate for it to go read the review. I want to know if you think it's inappropriate to be in there or not. All right, Brent, it is time to hit the road and talk about what we've been playing this week. It's a fairly short list. I have one game.
I have two, barely.
You have two. So start with your first game then, before we get into, of course, The Witcher. What else have you been playing this week?
Project Cars. I've been playing a little bit of Project Cars. Of course, I was gone for a few days, so I haven't played much of either of these. But I did start, as opposed to just the quick racing, which is what I was doing in last week when I was talking about Project Cars. I have gotten into career mode. I've started a new career in the game, and I'm working my way up from kart racing, buddy, where it all starts for a lot of professional drivers. And
like Mario Kart racing?
Well, I mean, it's not like there's goofy sound effects and power-ups on the track, but yeah, I mean, you're essentially talking about you're talking about go-karts basically, but go-karts that are they can go 100 miles an hour. So you're talking about a form of racing that is very near and dear to my heart, because I actually can race karts, as opposed to racing Formula One, which I cannot do. But anyway, so I'm kind of working on the kart series right now in Project Cars. I'm going to go through the career thing and all that. I do enjoy the game quite a bit, although there is one thing that I do really miss from Gran Turismo, and that was the licensing. The licensing tests and everything in Gran Turismo were essentially your tutorial section. That was like where they really kind of taught you the fundamental basics of driving and everything in the game. And even if you know those things intellectually, it's helpful to get a lot of practice in doing them in the game. It gets you used to the controller and the game physics and that kind of thing. And I wish that Project Cars kind of had something like that. I think it'd actually be really helpful, but they don't have it. And so I'm not going to whine about it too much, but it's just one of the things that I think that the series would be really, I think it'd be cool to include, and it would give you, just give you kind of a leg up as far as practice and everything, because right now I'm basically practicing by losing races and then replaying those races and slowly getting better.
Yeah. Brent,
you want to talk about The Witcher 3?
Oh God, do I want to talk about The Witcher 3?
Well, I don't have much to say. I mean, I'm still very, very early in the game. I'm just going after the Griffin right now. I mean, that's what I'm doing.
Oh, well, wait a minute! Spoiler alert!
It's not much of a spoiler. I mean, if that's out there in the gameplay trailer for the game. I mean, come on.
So, are we gonna keep it spoiler free? That is not it, and it's fairly early in the game. Are we going to keep it spoiler free, Brent? I think we're going to keep it spoiler free.
All right, yeah, that's fine.
I've played 22 hours of The Witcher this week, which is to say to you, that's
a lot.
I spent 50% of the time I spent at work this week, I spent with The Witcher. I am currently level 7 or 8, I think, after 22 hours. I am in love with this game.
Yeah.
This game is Red Dead Redemption. I don't know if you've been able to realize it yet, Brent. You're still in the prologue area, which I spent about 9 hours in the prologue area.
Right.
But this game is Red Dead Redemption in almost every way, with the exception of the fact that it's got, obviously it's a completely different world, and but it's got,
like, in terms of the mechanics and some of the,
like 100%. I mean, riding the horse around. I cannot tell you how many hours I have spent picking flowers.
I've picked a few flowers myself in just the short time I've been playing the game, which is only maybe an hour or two. But I've picked some flowers. I know what you're saying.
I am picking. I cannot walk past a flower if it's there. I cannot walk past it. I have spent a not insignificant amount of time, Brent, playing Gwent.
Gwent is actually pretty fun. I was surprised by how much I got into that.
Gwent is a very, very good. Many say better than Hearthstone. I haven't played Hearthstone, but Gwent is a game that I would be shocked if it doesn't break off and have its own whatever it is, mobile app.
That's what I was going to say. I was like, where's the iOS app? Where's the Android port? It's coming.
They've said no right now, but I imagine it has to, or a tabletop version of the game or whatever.
Or a fan-made version.
It's an excellent game, and I can't wait for mods on this. But so let me back up, Brent. So I had some real problems at the beginning. I got a new 970 to play this game, and the game has some real technical issues on the PC and on the PS4 and Xbox version. There's a significant amount of stuttering in the cutscenes, and my game, while running at 60 frames per second or more, if I unlock the frame rate, I was running at upwards of 80 frames per second with all my settings split between high and ultra. It's running at 60, 70 frames per second. It was still stuttering terribly in the game. I patched all the way up to 1.03. It's now at 1.04. And the stuttering in game still was not fixed. And so I found an article on PC Gamer actually recently that sort of did this explanation of why frames per second is not an accurate measuring stick for performance. And they talked about how you can drop frames in between the frames or something like that. And still get the juddering, even though you're running at 60 frames per second. And it points you to use this tool called Riva Tuner, RIVA Tuner, statistics server.
Oh, I've heard of this.
And there's instructions on PC Gamer as to how to configure it. And it's an app. It's an app you have running in the background, and it fixed my stuttering problems. So now
it fixed your stuttering problems, or it gave you like a diagnosis on how to fix your stuttering problems?
It fixed the stuttering problems.
Okay, the app itself did that.
So I have to have the app running to fix the stuttering problems. Without the app, it's still not patched well enough. My game is still jittery while I ride a horse or walk. Or
mine was pretty jittery as well. I was surprised by how choppy it felt, and I was pretty disappointed too, because I felt like finally here's a card that's going to kind of flex my 970's muscles, and like I turned everything all the way up, and I mean my frame rate was like 48 frames a second. So I mean, it wasn't 60, but I'm like, I'm fine with 48.
Right, you should be fine at 48.
That's fine. But it was so choppy. I'm like, this feels more like 20 frames a second.
Yeah, it's awful, and they still have not really fixed it. But this Riva Tuner statistics server, fixed the issue, and so right now I have that running, and I can run it now at 60 frames per second with. I have it locked at 60 frames per second with the hair effects on. And so it's running great. So I was really upset when it first came out, and I felt it wasn't playable, in my opinion. It was like so juddery that it wasn't playable. But after I fixed that, I began to play it, and goddamn, man, the game is unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah,
it is from an art design standpoint, from just a graphic standpoint, it's fantastically beautiful. The game is not perfect. Geralt moves like a tank, much like John Marston did so many years ago. I mean, Geralt doesn't move eloquently, although, interestingly enough, in combat, he's much more fluid. I'm really enjoying the combat. I'm loving the combination of signs and oils and potions and the actual combat itself and the RPG, the buff, the skills trees. Yep. They're very easy to access, much less confusing than they were in Witcher 2, and much better explained, much more well explained.
Are you playing with a keyboard and mouse or controller?
So I play with the controller on the TV. I recently, after probably 12 or so hours of play, maybe 14 hours of play, I was watching a piece on IGN, and Max Schofield talks about how he wasn't quite getting this sense of discovery that he had gotten from Skyrim, and he was kind of bummed about that. And he said, I did something that most other people won't do, and that is, he said, I turned off the HUD. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. He said, I stopped looking at the HUD all the time, the mini-map. He turned off the mini-map, actually. He stopped looking at the mini-map all the time, and he began looking at the world, and it was much more of a sense of discovery. And I thought, I'm going to try this. And for the first 45 minutes or so, like, I had to make myself do it because I was using it so much. Like, to everywhere I would go, I would follow the dotted line and maybe looking up in the right-hand corner, and I forced myself to do it for an hour. And after I did it for an hour, I haven't turned it back on, and I have no desire to because I don't look... I have almost all of my HUD turned off now. The only thing I have on is my potions and how many potions I have, and my health bar and that whole segment up in the top left corner. But those things go away except when you're in combat.
Correct.
So when I'm not in combat and I'm just riding my horse or whatever, I have no HUD on the screen at all.
That's cool. I think I might do that because I remember thinking about our conversation on the show where we kind of talked about mini maps and whether or not it was maybe not such a great thing, and I'd be very interested to experience the game like that. And since I've experienced so little, I don't think it would really hurt. I don't think it would really hurt all that much to switch over to it now.
No, you do. You have to get used to it. You have to accept, like, I do jump in and out of the map a lot more.
Yeah, sure.
Using the pause button. And I wish there was a quicker way to do that because of that. Like, if there was just a quick way to bring up the map. Like
the M key as an example.
Something like the M key on my controller. Yeah. If I could just yell M.
Map.
Map. But I truly love it, Brent. I love how customizable. I'm assuming it's this way on the consoles. I love how customizable the HUD is. You can really. Yeah. So the other thing I left on, for example, is when my armor is broken or weapons are broken, it shows an icon. I want to know that. Yeah. So I turned off most of the HUD. Like, I appreciate that I could turn off this. The one thing that drives me nuts about the Witcher games, and I don't know why they would even put this in there, is the chatter. The subtitles for the chatter of the like all the NPCs. So you'll be walking through a town
in the pub.
Yeah, you're like in a pub, and all it is like 50 lines of dialogue printed across the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
But I turn off all subtitles. I started with subtitles because when in a world like this that's a fantasy, I kind of like to see the words they're saying because the names of the cities and they're kind of weird. But I prefer it with having the subtitles off, so I turn those all off as well. But man, I am just this so far, and I'm 22 hours in. I think I said this is up there with and I say this with the caveat that no game is as good as Journey. Journey is like its own category off in the ether, and then there's everything else. And I would say that this game is up there with the best games ever made. I mean, it is so. I sit down and play, and I truly feel like I'm inside of this world in a way that few other games, in my opinion, have achieved, and Red Dead among them. It's been a very powerful experience for me, and I love it. And there's flaws all over, not all over, but there's flaws. Their portrayal of children is just awful. Just the actors, they can't, for whatever reason, they can't seem to write kids, and they can't find actors that play them well, and it's super annoying whenever there's a kid on screen. Things like that. I've had the game. Crashed several times in the beginning, but that's gone away. But there's I've had a couple clipping things, just a couple, but they've been there. Like, the game's not perfection, but it is. The sum is far, far greater than the parts, and I find it to be extremely engrossing.
I'm anxious to reach that point with it myself. I haven't been able to get to. I won't be able to get to it as much as you do. Just because I don't have that kind of time. But
since I'll be out of town for the next 2 weeks,
I might be able to catch up. You never know.
You'll have a little time to catch up because I won't be able to play it at all.
But I'm anxious to do that because I have really enjoyed what I've played thus far, and I want to get into it more and kind of get over the. I'm still in the initial stage where I'm still kind of learning the game. I'm still kind of figuring out the combat and what the best strategy is and all that. And I kind of want to get over that hump and just get to the point where I'm just experiencing the game.
I'm having fun playing with the signs. I stuck with Igni a lot at the beginning, which is the fire sign, because it's the most gratifying. And then for a while I thought, you know what? I'm going to try using the one that gives you a shield. I haven't used that for 10 hours. Like, I wonder if that's any good. And I started using it, and I was like, oh, wow, this is really, really good. And then I read somewhere that it's in your best interest to upgrade your, I can't remember which is which, act, the one that makes you take over people's brains. It's in your best interest to upgrade that, because not too far into the game, you'll start being able to use it in conversation trees. And so I upgraded that, and I started using it in combat. And it is incredibly useful in combat, and once you upgrade it in a way that I never thought it would be. I was fighting some flying creatures, just to give you an example, and I hate fighting flying creatures because you never know like how well the mechanics work in the game. And I found if I waited for them to get close and I cast this sign, it would take over their brain and they would fall to the ground and just like kind of writhe on the ground, and I could kill them.
And then it's shish kebab city.
I mean, I just absolutely slice and diced them. It is, dude. It feels on the level of Red Dead Redemption. Genuinely, it feels on the level. Now,
I'm so happy to hear that.
I don't know that it will, like, the type of world is not as compelling to me as the Old West is, and I will be absolutely shocked if, I've heard some reports at the end already, but I will be shocked if the emotional experience that I felt like Red Dead provided at the end. And the whole overarching story and the father and son and all that stuff, I'll be shocked if Witcher achieves that. But the ride itself is, I mean, it's the whole thing, dude. The stranger missions, side missions that take 2 hours. It's really incredible. The one thing that amazes me about games like this, though, dude, is, and it's starting to frustrate me, is that every single person in the world, there is nobody in the world you can ask, hey, can I borrow $1? And they'll be like, sure, you can borrow $1, but you'll have to pay me back $2 or something like that. It's always everybody in the world. It's always, can I borrow $1? Yes, but you got to do something for me first.
Yep.
That's always the response. And just once I want to see in this game somebody say like, oh, sure, here you go.
Here's $1.
Yeah.
Just for variety's sake.
Just, I mean, it's like everybody's got, like, it's an agenda.
I can't imagine why people would feel that way. That's for the mod community to sort out. The mod community will sort out.
Which I can't wait for, dude.
Realistic loaning mechanics.
That's why it got to be about money.
That's right.
Why you got to make it about money, Brent.
All right.
It's really that good, and I think you're gonna be pleased once you dive in.
So I guess it's time to head into the sunset.
That it is.
Close things out and get ready to finish the show. Lauren, why don't you go first? What's the end of the sunset topic you wanted to bring up this week?
I just wanted to take another minute, Brent, to reiterate how great The Witcher 3 is.
That's what I'm going to be doing, you asshole.
No. My topic for End of the Sunset is actually another Kickstarter, Brent, that one of our listeners pointed out today. And I don't know if you had a chance to go watch the video or not, Brent, but it's called Umbra.
Not yet.
And it's kind of, they're sort of describing it as, or they aren't, but people are describing it as a Diablo made in CryEngine.
Okay.
It's PC and Linux only. It's from a company called Solarfall, which I believe this is their first game. It's 3 guys that sort of started working on this about 4 years ago. Kickstarter's up right now. It's got about 20 days left. It's only, you can get the tier level where you get the game is $15, although the estimated release date is October 2016. But go watch the video, man. It looks like just an absolutely beautiful Diablo-esque game, and it looks really, really interesting. So I encourage people to check out Umbra.
Very cool. For my End of the Sunset, I want to just reiterate real quickly how awesome Danger 5 is, and I appreciate all of you who have been messaging me and tweeting at me, letting me know that you're checking out Danger 5 and you're enjoying it. I'm very, very gratified to have been able to share that with people and spread a little bit of the love. Lauren, have you found your way back? I know that you watched the first episode and you're kind of like, I don't know, it didn't really grab me. Did you check out any others?
I have not made my way back to it. I have, like I said, I put 22 hours into The Witcher, so I have not really been watching much of anything, but I did watch about half of the first episode. I didn't love it, as I told you, but I promised you that I would go back and give it another shot.
Please do, because I think, well, and I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that, like, I think that the sort of the style of humor of the show, which is, it does lean absurdist, and the sort of the kitsch factor of the show, based in the sort of the 60s nostalgia, spy genre and all that thing. I think if those things are not to your liking, then the show's just not going to work. But if you do like those things, then I think that coming back to the show might, you might buy into it at some point.
So I wasn't expecting. I think I was a little taken aback by the miniatures, Brent, or puppets, or
the miniatures. You mean like the cars,
felt, the felt that everything is made out of, or whatever. That yes, not the. I think that took me aback a little bit, and so I think I needed to step away and go back. But I will check it out. I will check it out, knowing that your love is so deep.
Oh, it is. Danger 5 is it, man. Real quickly, I'll just mention I've got a link here in Into the Sunset. It's the last Witcher 3 thing I'll say in the show. But CD Projekt has responded to the issue we talked about last week with the downgrade on The Witcher 3. They did an interview with Eurogamer where they talk about what happened and why they did what they did and why they've responded as they had. And I think it's worthwhile to go check it out. It's interesting to read their responses. And I think that I think that people have faith that CD Projekt is going to make this right, and they certainly seem to be intimating that they're going to continue to support the game and that they are going to try and smooth things over with their audience on this. So anyway, in light of what we were talking about last week, I wanted to point that out and direct people to go view that if you haven't already.
Indeed. All right, Brendan. With that, I think we will call it a show. Remember, I will not be here for the next couple of weeks, but Brent will, with a couple of other co-hosts that I think you will find exciting. As usual, we want to hear your guys' thoughts on everything that we talked about on the show this week, whether it's CD Projekt Red and how they respond to the downgrade issue, the Umbra Kickstarter, The Witcher 3 itself. We, of course, would love to hear what you guys are thinking, and if you're playing it, which we know you are. Project Cars, what we talked about while we were hanging out in the clubhouse, The Boy Who Cried White Wolf, Adrian Shamarl as his critique of Arthur Geis's review of The Witcher 3. And up in the garage, we talked about the new retro VGS, the ukulele Kickstarter, Rockstar Games filing a lawsuit against the BBC, and the possible Batman Arkham Asylum, Arkham City PS4 remaster. We want to hear your thoughts on those topics and anything else in gaming that you want to talk about. As usual, he is Brent Adams, and I am Lauren Baumgart. And remember, you don't stop playing because you get old. You get old because you stop playing.